How do we decide what is true? How do we, as the imperfect, mortal beings that we are, actually evaluate information to take action and rationalize our behaviors? When evaluating the truthfulness of an idea, I want to discuss two sources we typically rely on to form our conclusions. First, authority figures. For example, experts, religious leaders, family elders, politicians, but these can also be institutions, like the scientific method or religious texts. And secondly, we rely on our own experiences. Now, for any information that we evaluate, we use some combination of these two inputs to decide what we think is true. Some evaluations will lean very heavily on authority. For example, water is made up of 2 atoms of hydrogen and 1 atom of oxygen. We can't very well experience the atomic structure of matter, so we just have to take our chemistry textbooks and our analytical tools for granted. For other evaluations, we lean more heavily on our own experiences. For example, having your wisdom teeth removed is miserable, or going swimming on a hot day is a great way to cool off. Now, within a subset of postmodern, new agey approaches to personal development, approaches involving enlightenment, transcendental meditation, spirituality, there seems to be a popular idea that truth is much better gleaned from experience than from external authority. And there's good reason for this claim. While relying on the testimony of experts may seem objective, the way that we actually use it is anything but. You can think of any controversial topic that's teeming with experts. Political ideologies, climate change, social justice, human rights, for example. In all of these fields, there are experts which take all possible sides of a given issue. The conclusions that each expert reaches are hopefully objective, or at least as objective as is reasonable for a human, but our choice of which experts to believe in is highly subjective and arbitrary. Sometimes we go by consensus. If 90% of experts agree, then we say they are correct. But at other times, we may doubt experts, even if they have a strong consensus. It's typically argued that if we aren't exceptionally disciplined with our thoughts, we first come to a conclusion about what we believe is true, and only then do we pick the experts that agree with us, while finding excuses to invalidate the ones that don't. See confirmation bias. As a result, some argue that relying on the testimony of experts is not an accurate method for determining truth, and that relying on our own experiences really is the only method to achieve complete truth. But unfortunately, there are some difficulties with this approach. So let's assume, for the purpose of this discussion, that we can only trust experiences, not experts, at least when it comes to absolute truth. Even in this case, there's an unsolved conundrum that we still need to address. How do we justify placing more weight on our own experiences than on the experiences of others when it comes to determining truth? In other words, when you and I have experiences that disagree, how do I decide that my experience is correct and yours is wrong? This seems like a silly question, but allow me to make the argument that our own experiences are no more validating for claims of truth than are those of other people. Let's give an example. You and I were best friends, and we loved to play Pokemon Go together. Do people still play Pokemon Go? I wrote the original version of this article 3 or 4 years ago when a Pokemon Go reference would have made more sense, but it does look like there's still tournaments in 2024, so I guess it's fine. You know what Pokemon Go is, right? Anyways, we're playing Pokemon Go at the mall. Do people still go to malls? Do malls still exist? Anyways, it's fine, right? We're playing Pokemon Go at the mall. So we catch a glimpse of our quarry near the Mega Burger, but it disappears quickly and we can't find it again. What was it? I clearly saw a Bulbasaur, but you disagree. It was obviously a Snorlax, you say. What? Bulbasaur and Snorlax are totally different. Are you sure you saw it clearly? Indeed you did, you say. You as well are incredulous that I could mistake a Snorlax for a Bulbasaur. So we investigate the Mega Burger in detail, to much amusement of the employees, but we cannot catch a second glimpse of the mysterious Pokemon. So here we have 2 experiences, one of a Bulbasaur and one of a Snorlax. Now, I probably trust my own eyes and might wonder if your brain and eyeballs are functioning nominally. But why do we weigh our own experiences much more heavily than those of other people? This self-bias has insidious consequences in scenarios far more dire than simply filling up one's Pokédex. When we support political or economic ideologies, pick a religion, etc., we may pull on our own experience and disregard mutually exclusive experiences of others. Although it isn't often treated as such, our willingness to blatantly dismiss the experiences of others when making claims of absolute truth is a serious problem. So how do we reconcile the experiences of others when they are different and mutually exclusive from our own? I can think of only a few reasons that might justify dismissing the experiences of others. Spoiler, none of them make particularly convincing arguments. Possibility number 1. Other people's experiences are not genuine, or they are lying. An often employed tactic, when one doesn't want to waste time or energy dismantling a foe's argument with brilliant reason, is simply to accuse them of being dishonest or foolish. Some examples of thoughts that would fit into this viewpoint. Your experience is invalid because it is a result of moral failure on your part. Your experience is invalid because you lack certain skills or other qualifications that I deem necessary for a genuine experience. Your experience is invalid because it is a result of a psychological disorder you're suffering from. Your experience is invalid because you didn't actually experience it. You just believe it. Maybe because someone told it to you or because you want to believe it. You're lying to me about your experience. You aren't telling me your genuine experiences because you want to mislead me. You're lying to yourself about your experience. You're trying to reinforce an incorrect narrative that you tell yourself, and you need to subconsciously lie to yourself to do so. These are all examples of things that I can tell myself to justify why my experience accurately reflects reality, while yours, when you disagree with me, does not. Now, I think it's reasonable that any of these examples could be true some of the time. But in reality, that's simply not good enough. If I follow this train of thought to its ultimate conclusion, I would have to believe that anyone whose experience leads to a conclusion that is mutually exclusive with mine is either lying or wrong in every single circumstance. Well, you may ask, what if we use a consensus? If most people have experiences similar to mine and few people have experiences like yours, then my experience is obviously a more accurate representation of reality. Right? Well, maybe. But the application of consensus reality can be easily subjective as well. Let's say we wanted to further examine the identity of this elusive Pokemon at the Mega Burger. So we gather 998 more people, and it just so happens that each one of them glimpses something moving across their phone screens in the vicinity. Maybe a few of the participants even buy some food, so the Mega Burger is happy too. Win-win. So we get the results back, and let's say we end up with 950 people claiming to have seen a Snorlax, 40 people saw a Bulbasaur, 9 people saw a Pidgey, and 1 person saw a refrigerator. Great, so we can happily conclude that the Pokemon was indeed a Snorlax? But what would we conclude if only 80% of the people saw a Snorlax instead of 95%? What if it was 50%? While consensus-driven reality can be useful at times, it's important to realize that the threshold we set for truth is equally arbitrary. You might argue that I can know the full extent of my own experience while knowing yours only from the words that you use to describe it. While this is possibly true, and language is very limited in describing our experiences, it is irrelevant when trying to determine whether your experience or my experience is more indicative of objective reality. Your experience, after all, is just as real to you as mine is to me. Whenever we use our own experiences to describe something external to ourselves, we are by definition attempting to convert something subjective into something objective. When I judge your claims of experience, how do I know that those judgments that I make of you are not only accurate, but are also indicative of the accuracy of your belief or your feelings? If I'm extremely skeptical, again I come to this conclusion that anyone whose experience is mutually exclusive with my own is either lying or wrong. Overall, I consider this to be a generally pessimistic and narrow-minded viewpoint that seems unlikely to be true. Also see the introspection illusion. But if I'm humble enough to decide that my experiences aren't just inherently better than yours, what other reason might I have to dismiss your experiences while preferring my own when it comes to interpreting objective reality? Well, possibility number 2, reality is subjective. What if everyone's experience is truly representative of external reality, even when those experiences between people are contradictory? In other words, we can all experience reality in different ways, and all of those experiences are true objectively. If I saw a Bulbasaur, then there's a Bulbasaur. If you saw a Snorlax, then there isn't a Bulbasaur, but there is a Snorlax. And both of our experiences are true at the same time. So the mysterious Pokemon was simultaneously a Bulbasaur and a Snorlax. That Bulblax? Anyways, so instead of using consensus reality to claim that our elusive Pokemon is a Snorlax, maybe we instead claim that the Pokemon is some hybrid beast of all of our experiences. So it's 95% Snorlax, 4% Bulbasaur, 0.9% Pidgey, and 0.1% Refrigerator. Is subjective reality possible? Sure. But it would be very hard to prove, and I also suspect people would be unsatisfied, being unable to make claims more definitive than climate change is true for me, or in my world, humans only have 2 genders. A third possible justification of this discrepancy between our experiences could simply be that our experiences just don't accurately describe objective reality. Our different experiences may indicate that our limited cognitive and sensory capabilities simply aren't suited for objective identification of the nature of reality, as evidenced by the multitude of conflicting experiences that we all have collectively and which we consistently fail to reconcile. There are many studies which demonstrate how sensory input is distorted or even disregarded completely when it comes to our conscious experiences. For example, how we experience the taste of food is sometimes not linked at all to the response of the taste receptor cells in our tongues. See the work of neuroscientist Camilla Arndal Anderson. Similarly, what we see and hear can be influenced at least as much by what we expect than what we actually observe. See the work of another neuroscientist, Anil Seth. And Shankar Vedantam, a podcast host of Hidden Brain and journalist, explains how our memories are fallible. YouTuber Michael Stevens of Vsauce demonstrated that we can believe to have memories of things that never happened. While these are seemingly simple examples, they imply the possibility of separation between experience and reality on a more fundamental level. This viewpoint does lead to a few more questions, though. If we are physiologically incapable of experiencing objective reality now, will we be able to at some point in the future, through some sort of technological innovation? And if so, how will we know when our interpretation is correct? If we decide that our experiences don't, or maybe even can't, objectively interpret reality, then we are left only with the testimony of experts. And we're back to the problem of deciding which experts should be trusted. Still, none of these points invalidates the possibility that our limited perspectives prevent us from attaining a complete and objective picture of reality through experience alone. This viewpoint may be unsatisfying, but it is at least very feasible. And lastly, possibility number 4, for why I may choose to rely on my own experiences in determining truth while disregarding yours. Possibility number 4 is that only I exist. Now, although this perspective may seem excessively egotistical or narcissistic, it is actually a valid philosophical viewpoint. See solipsism. In essence, we are avoiding the problem by claiming that there aren't actually multiple experiences. Instead of my experience and your experience, I can only really be sure that I exist, and thus that only I have experiences. This implies that either you are a figment of my imagination, maybe I have a suppressed desire to capture a Snorlax, or, according to some schools of thought, that you and me and everything else in existence is a singular consciousness. Ultimately, though, this viewpoint really just says that I can't verify whether or not you exist, or anything else for that matter. While this may or may not be true, it doesn't really provide us with much of an answer. So we've discussed the conundrum of assessing the objective truthfulness of your experience in comparison to my own. And we've come up with 4 possibilities to justify our potential disagreements when it comes to interpreting objective reality. Number 1, that your experiences are wrong, that we're hopelessly biased, but you especially. Number 2, that reality is subjective, that our perceptions aren't subjective, but reality is. Number 3, that we're all just pitiful mortals with sensory and cognitive systems that are woefully inadequate for experiencing reality as it truly is. And number 4, that there's only a singular consciousness that can experience things, and of course, it is mine. Now, while I suspect that it's reasonable to reject possibility number 1 as a poor justification for treating my own experiences as more true than the experiences of others, the remaining 3 possibilities are harder to outright deny. I personally expect that we're all just really bad at observing objective reality through experience alone. But of course I can't justify dismissing the possibility of a subjective reality or a singular consciousness. But what do you think? Are there other ways to interpret these 4 possibilities that I've described here? Are there other possibilities that I didn't consider? Or are the discrepancies between our experiences not a problem for you? And if not, why not?